welcome everyone for our final open discussion of the season, although we will have a town hall meeting next week. But in terms of talking about our themes and our panel discussions, this is the last one of the season. Today, I am joined by Lindsey Anderson, and we will be talking about enterprise strategy, in particular, two panels that we had this week. The first led by George Westerman, which was our CIO award panel and presentation, and the second one led by Zoya Kinsler, who had a nice discussion with Yossi Sheffi on reshaping business strategy for the new abnormal. So I would say that you should all be familiar now with our community guidelines. If not, you can read them in the community, but the gist is to be supportive, generous, and constructive in your comments. All participants come on mute to speak with a comment or a question. Please use the raise hand functionality in Zoom. You can find that under reactions. And if you don't see it under reactions, then look under participants, because it means that you have an old version of the plugin. And we'll call on you and we'll get you into the discussion, and that will be great. And I do want to remind people that we encourage as many people as possible to speak. So if you've not raised your hand before, please give it a try. We do want to hear from you. So we've organized into three topic areas. First of all, the CIO Leadership Award and background. Lindsey's going to talk about that. I think you'll find it interesting. Then we'll get into the discussion that the finalists have, as well as talking about the new abnormal. So with that, I want to bring on the prior chair of the symposium, the guy that I inherited this job from, Lindsey Anderson. What do you have to say about the Leadership Award, Lindsey?
Well, we had a really great batch of candidates this year. So let's get started by reintroducing who our finalists were this year. And Allan, if you could provide that slide.
Okay. Here they are.
Well, excellent. So normally we have 4 finalists, but we had a really strong batch of candidates this year. So we expanded it to 5. Starting with George Westerman, he's our lead academic here at MIT. He's been very instrumental around the award process in the intellectual foundation of the award. Our finalists were Marina Ballini from BAT, Vipin Gupta from Toyota Financial Services, Anam Khare from Oshkosh Corporation. And so I'll just say a brief moment about Oshkosh. So when I first, saw this nomination and, didn't actually get into the reading, Oshkosh, I was thinking kids' clothing. It's not kids' clothing. Oshkosh Corporation makes specialty vehicles like fire trucks, ambulances, and things like that. Also, we have Pratish Manakota from Sheila Foam, which is a mattress company in India, and Bryson Keeler, who's Chief Technical Officer at Equifax. So each of these individuals was really very, very good. It was tough to make a decision as to which was the award winner. After a very long discussion around the various candidates, the judging team decided on Vipin Gupta. So once again, I'd like to congratulate Vipin for being this year's MIT Sloan CIO Leadership Award winner. Now, I also thought it would be beneficial if we talked a little bit about the award process and the judging criteria. So basically, this is how it works. We have all the applicants. They become applicants by submitting an application, which is a standard form which is on our website. And then we go through 3 rounds of judging. The first round, everybody is reviewed by at least 2 of our judges, so that there's, to make sure there isn't any bias involved. And then we go review those, the first round judges. They do a numerical score for each of the candidates, and we take that into account when narrowing down the list of essentially the semifinalists. And then before we get to the final round, we have, the first round is done by industry experts, including many members of the media. The second round is done by CIOs, essentially finalists and winners from prior years. So they really know how to evaluate and have a sense for what's really an exceptional CIO. So we meet with those judges, and we have a free-flow conversation around the finalists, and then we decide on who the finalists are going to be. And then there's a team of George and Allan, myself, Irving, and Ray Chang that go through and we interview each of the candidates and then pick a winner. So I wanted to share with you one of the most challenging questions that we have on the form. And, and it's basically this, what have you, in the course of your career, what have you done that didn't work well? What was a failure and how did you, what did you learn from it? So that's always a very challenging question because the CIOs resist answering. Basically what happens is that, they put everything into a positive spin. So one of the questions I have for you folks in the course of this discussion is is that a good question? Should we continue asking it? Or is that something that, we should just drop? The other thing I want to focus on is what the criteria is for judging. And, I mentioned George before, and, this criteria is coming from George Westerman's excellent book, The Real Business of IT, How CIOs Create and Communicate Value. He co-wrote it with Richard Hunter. And so there's basically 4 criteria. Exceptional communicator. So a CIO needs, this is the vision thing. A CIO, to be an exceptional CIO, needs to be able to communicate a vision and share that with the executive team as well as the people on his team. Recognized IT leader. So this is the right service at the right price, at the right level of quality. So it's also essential that the CIO be able to get the knitting done. This is keeping the lights on. So if a CIO is not able or recognized as a strong IT leader, he's not going to have trust within his executive team. And without that trust, he's not going to be, or she is not going to be able to fully move the organization strategically. The third criterion is a recognized IT leader. So this is, understanding what the business is, what the needs of the business units are, being able to speak the language of the business. And so that's how through this role or this criteria, this is how CIOs innovate and how they help move the organization forward strategically. And driver, the final criteria is driver of business value. So this is essentially Well, we talked about that. Excuse me. The next one is the CIO plus, and that is, what other role, business role, does an executive have outside of the formal CIO function? So, many instances, CIOs who are, have the CIO plus functionality, they're leading, customer service, customer support, supply chain, any other number of different business functions outside of the traditional business role. So what do you think of these four criteria? Does anybody have any stories they would like to share? And about, giving insights and more texture to the criteria? Which of these do you think are more important? What additional criteria should we add? Is there anything that is no longer relevant? So I'm going to give you a moment to sort of think about that. And then, I'll talk a little bit about, the impact of COVID on what some of the CIOs and also Yossi had to say about that.
Yeah, so I do encourage people to raise their hand. Again, go to reactions in Zoom and you can use the raise hand button. We're interested to know, especially if you have a story about something that you did in IT that didn't go well, the tough question that we ask all of the CIO candidates, or comments about the criteria for the CIO award. And then we can get into the panel discussion, as Lindsey said, for for the first panel on Tuesday. So anybody, any brave souls to jump into this conversation?
All right, I'm just going to jump in here. I saw in the chat that somebody, the first criteria, and that was exceptional communicator. So the CIO needs to be able to communicate a vision throughout the organization.
So Lindsey, Irving has a comment. I'm going to unmute him or ask him to unmute.
Yeah. For a while, there's been this view that failure is celebrated in startups and Silicon Valley. And a number of people have pointed out that it's not failure that you're celebrating, it's the ability to keep learning from your real experiences. And maybe the question should be reshaped to have there been projects that, while not as successful as you would have liked them to be, maybe didn't even go well, became very important learning experiences. And given that our CIOs like to be positive, maybe they like to talk about learning experiences from things that didn't go well, and they can make that a positive rather than have to focus on failures.
How have you learned and grown from past experiences that didn't go well? Something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the learning and growing thing. Anybody else want to?
Well, we got Zoya coming up,
Okay.
Lindsey. So Irving, I think that's a good suggestion. We can talk about that on a team call. And I am trying to. Zoya, you must be unmuted already.
Yes. Hi. May I speak? Yes.
Oh, yes.
Thank you, Allan. So yes, I'm familiar with the criteria. I used to be on the award committee, as you might remember. And I found it extremely difficult to measure and to compare. the submissions. So I applaud the committee for being able to weigh all these high-achieving CIOs against each other, because the submissions always have some golden nuggets that are unique to the organization or the skills of a CIO. But my particular question is this: most of the criteria seem to allude to soft skills, so to speak, and they must be represented in the submission. The only really measurable hard skill or hard achievement I found in among the criteria is the driver of business value. So the driver of business value, how do you measure that? And whether you value the amount of money saved or revenue achieved with the new product launched, with the real business transformation having brought the business outcome. Could, Lindsey, you comment on this? Or how my suggestion would be highlight this particular criterion and bring it up in the priority.
Okay, so what I'm hearing you say, Zoya, is that this is probably, from your perspective, the most important criteria. So well, currently we're measuring it by, there's a question about innovation. So we're looking at innovation. When we talk about we also have some questions around, leadership of the IT organization. And in there, we're looking at, what sort of changes have they made, have they been able to save money? Those CIOs that, make it to the finalists are ones that are sharing numbers. Those numbers are, confidential. But, they're sharing, they're giving us, it's not just I did a great thing. I did a great thing because I saved, 10% here. So that's, now our, all our applications, aren't that specific. Some of them are vague. And those are the ones that don't make it. So,
Lindsey, if I may just add one thing,
sure.
This is not the CIO award. This is the CIO Leadership Award.
Yes.
And I think it's really important to always have that distinction in mind. The primary focus is to find top level leaders. And so it is by design trying to emphasize assessment of leadership quality.
Perfect. Excellent. Do we have anybody else that wants to contribute to the conversation?
Anybody else? Especially for those people who haven't raised their hand in the past, I just want to emphasize we do want to hear from you, and we are a friendly group, so don't be shy. Kevin is up.
Good morning, everybody. This reminds me of a set of conversations I've had in a couple different contexts. One happened to be in college and as part of the awards committee for the university I went to. And the process of trying to identify an individual for this award or that award, Wall Street Journal Award, IBM Award, those sort of things, most likely to succeed in their chosen profession. And I combine it with 35, 40 years of doing postmortem exercises on literally hundreds of projects. And you go, what did we learn? And what would we do different if we knew then what we knew now? And one of the things that jumps out at me, that first of all 5 finalists were terrific. So I don't know what the total list of submissions were. But the first note I actually wrote down as I listened to this morning's comments is they're all winners.
They definitely are all winners.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure whoever number 6 was also a winner. So the question is, do you really need to select a single individual winner? Because what comes to mind on these things is 3 or 4 points that were made. One, what's the situational context? Is that really communicable to people outside any given organization? I think Zoya's point about the objective criteria was right, which you can do through the application process. And then, Lindsey, I think you said just a second ago, if my memory serves, that the level of detail on some of these applications is not the same as others, and those have a tendency to get filtered out early. So a potential thing to think about is the application process have whatever it is, it's objective criteria, it's situational criteria, it's contextual criteria, and then the innovation box or whatever themes that you want to measure upon, the leadership aspect that Allan just said. And maybe that actually gets assessed by some sort of sentiment machine learning. So that the objectivity, and I think you mentioned this first review, or one of the first reviews, was to assure that there's less bias, although machine learning does have bias, unfortunately, in too many cases. That scenario says, hey, what we have is 4, 5, 3, whatever the threshold that the panel wants to do, and they're all winners, and actually going to the process and selecting just one. It's terrific for VIP, and I thought his story was great, particularly in 7 months getting the financial services outside of, I think, if I remember correctly, it was Mazda was their big external client. That what it really is a recognition from obvious a very, very prestigious set of people that are on this issue. And you say, hey, I'm a finalist and an award recipient. And getting the process from 4 or 3 or 6 to 1, is that incremental value really what you're looking for? Or is the tapestry of the 3 or 4 or 5 excellent finalists actually more applicable to a broader audience as opposed to, and again, I don't want to degrade anything because I think all of this was terrific, that VIPN and financial services may not make a whole lot to a wholesale distributor. I mean, it's not as applicable.
Right.
And so that cross-industry, or the difficulty in having cross-industry applicability actually has a tendency to pigeonhole the winner, and it's not as generically applicable to cross-industry. So just some random thoughts as I listened to this morning's comments.
Well,
Right.
you'll remember when George did the introductions on Tuesday, he was very explicit that every one of those people on the stage was a winner. And so, yes, I would agree with that. And shame on me if I didn't, articulate that as well. But, they are all very much winners. They're all exceptional CIOs. We're proud to have them as part of the MIT CIO Symposium family. And we look forward to working with them, in future years. Some of these people will become judges for next year.
So, Lindsey, with that, I'm going to bring on David. And then we, just to remind everybody, we have 2 other topics. We want to talk about the actual panel discussion on Tuesday, as well as the panel discussion on Wednesday. So we're getting up to the top of the hour. We've talked about the criteria. So let's bring David on and then move to the actual panels and enterprise strategy.
Sounds good.
David, you're up.
Thank you, Allan and Lindsey. I just wanted to raise a point that I've been thinking about as we're talking about comparing CIOs. I don't know how many people here are old enough to remember a database called PIMS, P-I-M-S, that came out of MIT and was brought into, I believe it was a consulting firm, the Strategic Planning Institute, which I don't believe is a unique name. And a point that they had made, this goes back to the 80s, that stuck with me. is they gave a scenario where I think they were judging CEOs, and they pointed out, let's say you had one guy who got a 10% ROI and another guy who got a 40% ROI. Which one did better? And we normally go to the 40% ROI guy as having done better. But then if you compare them with people like them, in companies like them, if the average of the guy who got 40% was 80%, and the average of the guy who made 10% was losing 10%, that puts it in a very different perspective. And I don't know to what extent we have the tools or could create the tools to compare performance of CIOs who face very different problems. Because I do not believe we have a homogeneous market out there. I believe that being, the CIO of a company like Amazon is different than being the CIO of State Street Corporation. I'm not sure exactly what the differences are. I just picked two that seem different to me. And I think that it is both interesting and difficult to consider how someone would be expected to perform in a role amongst their peers in organizations like them. The same point in a disruption curve, the same market share, the same rate of change in their supply chain. Certain things are more difficult than others. And I just thought I would raise that point because as we're talking about comparing people, clearly I believe that the CIOs that were our finalists were, excellent candidates and very interesting. But as I looked at their experiences in their companies, they all faced very different problems.
They all face very different problems. Judging itself is hard, in part because of that. You got Vimpin. How do you compare him with, other, financial auto companies? It's difficult. We're looking at, the candidates we have, and we try to select the ones that, are, the most qualified. And we're trying to do that balance between, recognize that they're all winners, that we have a good set of people. And then, we're, trying to narrow it down to one person. We can, the team, can discuss, later whether it's worthwhile, going to that final one. So one of the benefits for the team and for George is that, these interviews, when we get to the finalists, we're actually talking to them. And that gives us a way better insight as to what they're doing. And it also helps prep George, for the panel, that discussion that he has, because he's had an opportunity, to talk to them as, individually, so he can develop the kind of questions that he thinks appropriate.
So, Lindsey, speaking of that, when you think about the panel, I just felt that a lot of really great nuggets came out of Tuesday. I don't know if you just want to pick out one or two that resonated with you and just bring those forward.
Sure. So I think what the couple of questions that I found interesting and that I want to share with you had to do with advice. Getting advice. Both. So we had a couple of questions that we asked, or George asked on Tuesday. One was, what was the best advice that you got from a mentor? And the other one was, what kind of advice would you give to an aspiring CIO? So, let's just, Vipin said that, the most valuable piece of advice that he received was, before you can lead others, you have to lead yourself. So there's self-discipline, control is a very important part of leadership. And Marina had an interesting, she talked about learn everything, but don't be a know-it-all. So, it's a lot of self-education, but you need to be politically astute. And the other thing was, what advice would you give to aspiring CIOs? So Bryce said, it's not how much or how well you have done your job since we last talked, but it's how much you changed your job since we last talked. So, this idea that CIOs are constantly changing their jobs. Anupam said, learn how the business makes money and keep learning that forever. So very much a strong business focus. Vipin, CIOs are architects and builders of the next version of the business. So lead the future. And Marina said, don't aspire to be a CIO, aspire to be a business leader in everything you do. Now, I believe that Pratish is on the call. If he wants to step forward and give his advice, I'm happy to hear that. So, let's open it up again. Is this good advice? What sort of, if you were, advising the CIO, what sort of things would you say?
Well, I would just add one to your list, which I thought was a very good list, and that is to treat feedback as a gift, something that we will remember next week when we go into town hall meeting. Yeah. So what were the other key points that people heard on Tuesday? I think there was a lot of other things going on. They talked about COVID leadership. They talked about how to foster strategic partnerships. We had a nice discussion about Agile and about learning. What did you take away? Kevin is up.
Allan, I literally, right when you said feedback is a gift, I just posted that in the group chat. But I think the other one that came out, and Lindsey, you may have said it, and I was looking at my notes, so if I'm being duplicative, I apologize. And I don't remember who said it, but start the day with expectations, end the day with experiences. And given the learning theme that we've had over the last 5 weeks, I think that was a pretty good one too.
Mm-hmm. I think that's excellent. Anyone else have something to share? So as far as, leading during COVID times, so that was an interesting question because that was something that was addressed in both sessions. It was addressed in the CIO session, and it was also addressed in the Yossi session, the unnormal, the abnormal. And each of them had a little bit different takes. So the CIOs were looking at it from the point of view of, how do I lead my team? And Yossi was looking at it from the point of view of, crisis management. So some of the things around leading the team, so Bryson said, you need to be purposeful. So basically, there's no more walking, managing by walking around. There's no more casual, meetings at the water cooler or the cafeteria. You have to make an effort for this to happen. And, even if, you need to put it on your calendar, even if it's only a 10 minute call for, with someone, but, if you want to get a sense for what's going on in your organization and what people are thinking, you need to actively reach out to them. And I think going forward, there's certainly, it's probably appropriate to do both. You certainly want to do more managing by walking around. The casual encounters are useful, but you also should be purposeful in engaging people to make those conversations happen. The other, so Anupam, added to that, and he said that yeah, purposeful is important because that's what makes collaboration happen. And that, that's in collaboration is what drives organizations forward. And Anupam also had another interesting insight where he said, it's just not COVID. There were cyber attacks, there are other things. And, the key takeaway here is that CIOs need to be able to multitask. They need to be able to manage more than one crisis at a time. Now, on the Yossi side, crisis management, his first thing was be cool, don't panic. And the image that I had in my mind is, the duck, very smooth, on the surface of the water, but pedaling like hell underneath. The second thing for crisis management had to do with communication. You have to have excellent communication because if you don't have communication, people will assume the worst. And the third thing was, make sure that, let people don't get in the way. The people closest to the problem are the ones that are going to have the best knowledge of it and be able to solve it best. And, it takes too much time, in a fast-moving crisis, to put things up the chain of command, wait for them to make a decision, and then bring it back down. So I see there's some hands up.
Yes. So, Lindsey, I'm going to bring on Martin. I just want to add one thing to what you said, and that is that I feel that I have heard from CIOs throughout the symposium that echoed a lot of the themes that you just said, and in particular, that the pandemic and some other events that happened over the past year has really brought people together, that there's a need to have empathy for the people, customers, employees, and others, but also social issues have become business issues, and the CIOs and CXOs have become cultural leaders within their company. And I've heard that those themes come up over and over, and I think they came out this week, and I think they'll continue to come out. With that, I'm going to bring on Martin. Martin, your hand was up and now it's down. What happened? He went away. Maybe he had to go. Well, Zoya, I'm going to unmute you. And Martin, if you are still there, if you could put your hand back up, because otherwise you drop into the abyss of many, many people, and it's hard for me to find you. Go ahead, Zoya.
Yes. I hoped Martin would speak, or in general, Lindsey, question to you. Are we wrapping up the part of the panel discussion with the CIO award winners? Because I want to comment on what you said about Yossi Sheffi's presentation. Is this a good time to do the pivot to the Wednesday meeting? Okay. Allan says, nods his head. So I wanted to point out that, yes, we had a wonderful discussion yesterday, and the leadership was his answer to the last question asked. He spoke about leadership, and you very eloquently recited his main points. But what, in my mind, is important for us to bring up from the discussion I facilitated yesterday was the overall theme was looking forward and building the resilience required in the enterprise. So the underlying theme of his book and the discussion yesterday, aside from the leadership qualities and crisis management, was the need for these important attributes, quality attributes, I would say, is flexibility, transparency, visibility, agility of not just the supply chain, not just technology platforms, but overall business architecture and business organization. So I would like to open it up to that.
Zoya, I have a question for you.
Yes.
So, one of the things that I thought was interesting in your discussion is that you brought up a couple of times the topic of justifying the investment in resilience, in particular cybersecurity. And you compared the investment to an investment in insurance. And I thought that was a really interesting and useful framing. And I just wonder if you could talk about that from your point of view.
Right. Thank you. I want to open the floor to everyone who, as a CIOs in the audience, you must have had experience in building a business case for investing capital funds in security platforms, and also maybe as well opening expense accounts for cybersecurity specialists. It's not tourist. It's extremely hard to do. Because, as I said yesterday, a data breach used to be very low chance, high impact events, and everyone would just close your eyes and think it will never happen, right? And when it happens, then it's a big emergency. So we lived through it in the pandemic. The CIOs and CEOs, the leaders of companies, had to keep their eyes open and act quickly. I hope there will be a way to do business justifications a little easier now that we have this precedent. But I would like to hear from people who have actually had to deal with that themselves.
All right. Well, right now we have Irving and then Kevin coming up. So let's start with Irving.
Okay,
The usual suspects.
So yeah, I think it was 2, maybe 3 years ago, Yossi and I were together. We were both speakers at a conference of supply chain executives. And in my talk, I said, how much I thought that blockchain technologies would have an impact on supply chains, help make them more efficient, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And Yossi came over to me, I think, later and said, well, Irving, I disagree with you. I don't think that much of blockchain. And I think that came up yesterday again, correct? That
He mentioned you.
Yeah, he mentioned, and he very nicely said he disagrees with me on blockchain. So yeah, why do you think Yossi disagrees on the importance of blockchain to supply chains?
Right. And you kind of switching the topic a little bit from the business value justification that Allan wanted to discuss. But let's do blockchain now because it's really a hot topic for everyone. Why do I think that? Because we have a precedent. We have a couple of consortiums established, and I mentioned TradeLens yesterday for supply chain. Actually, MediaLedger is also in the supply chain field for pharma. So yes, and as you know, even probably better than I do, that they are in early stages. So, but if we're looking underneath, I am a big proponent of the technology itself. I believe that Satoshi Nakamoto, whether he is a person or a group, deserves Nobel Prize for inventing the algorithm for solving the immutability problem mathematically. So blockchain as a technology gives us the foundation for something really big and important in the future, completely aside from currency for providing
forget the currency.
Right. For transparency, security, and immutability in ecosystems, not within the enterprise. It's an overkill. It's expensive overkill to build IBM Hyperledger platform, what you can do with a single database. Right.
Agree.
But when it's multiple enterprise players in a large distributed platform-based ecosystem, yes, blockchain will work. It is just a matter of maturity of technology, adoption, making it cheaper, making it so that you switch from proof of, proof of work, which is expensive mining, to proof of stake. And Ethereum 2.0 might do it in the future. But it is just an early stage. We are in the Gartner S-curve. We are in what is it called? The early adoption stage.
Yeah. Could you tell from Yossi why he didn't like? Because I really appreciate
expensive and slow. He says it's expensive and slow.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
it's only
so-
slow.
so-
This is the misunderstanding. Blockchain in business is mostly private blockchains, has nothing to do with mining. It's
So
only
that is an overkill for that, but we'll see.
well,
Yeah.
it's only the members of the ecosystem that participate in the blockchain. That's not slow. That is just a distributed database. So
Irving, I will say that I talked to Yossi about your dispute, and Zoya is correct. His issue was the cost of distributed consensus, as well as the transaction speed, which, as you know, for cryptocurrency or Bitcoin in particular, is very slow. But with that, we don't need to. You should call Yossi yourself and have this debate. I'm gonna bring Kevin on. Kevin, you're up if but we're gonna avoid cryptocurrency right now, unless you want to give me some Bitcoin.
Yeah, I'll give you the quarter of Bitcoin that I have. So always great to come back to topic after following Irving and Zoya's energetic exchange. I'm bringing them back. I think, Zoya, what you're asking for was real life. How do you fund things that are effectively insurance policies? So my example is Staples. In the 2006, 2010, 11 period, I was head of global infrastructure for them and had 2 of 4 major challenges that are applied exactly to what you're talking about. One was, how do we get PCI compliant? And number 2 was, how do we have a meaningful disaster recovery business continuity plan? And for those who know the Staples story, it was a hyper growth mindset, and it was a land grab. So it's like deploy it, fix it later. And so that resulted in 3,000 to 4,000 images on standalone servers, all running at less than 5%. So economically, that was a non-starter. So I'm going to put some real numbers on this because I think it's dated enough, and I'm frankly the authority on the numbers. The DR plan was 50 to 60 million to do it standalone. Wow. And the PCI compliance plan was in the neighborhood of 80 to 100 million. Because one of the things that in the infinite wisdom of a fast growth company, that Staples was when it was the original of the office products thing, was, guess what the customer ID number was? Credit card. 250 million plus of them. So to put this in perspective, the total IT corporate spend was in the neighborhood of 210 million, and the business units could invest another 200 to 300. So call it 500 million total company wide, not a $25 billion base. But if you do it on a $220 million base, 50 to 60 and 80 to 100 are non-starters. Yet, guess what? Those were the mission. That was my mission. Those were 2 of my 4 major responsibilities when I took the job. So at the end of the day, it was threefold. One, you have to architect the success you're looking for. And the nice thing about disaster recovery and security is they have similarities, unfortunately just not overlaps. And that is, you want no single point of failure in any of those 2 architectures. You have to do security in layers. And one of my favorite saying in the SecOps space is, do you want to put the house inside a safe or the safe inside the house? And so when it came, part of the reason why PCI was so expensive was literally hundreds of systems. And I don't know if Beth O'Rourke happens to be on the call today, because she was pretty critical to this effort, because she was the application and enterprise leader for this. But nevertheless, the trick was to say, how do we isolate so we could put the safe inside the house? And on the disaster recovery issue was, we made sure we had no single point of failure. So we went from being highly distributed, frankly, highly insecure, to where we were able to, in the DR space, do Superstorm Sandy. We actually had a fiber optic cut that we survived. We had 4 or 5 ice storm power outages and never had a blip. And from a security standpoint, ultimately, in somewhere in the 214, 215 area, I think security Staples did have a security issue that was malware that came in on the card readers. But the actual credit cards were a whitelisted server that we actually teamed with RSA for an industry platform, what was called tokenization. And then, so those kind of 1 and 2. And then 3, the way we funded it was through virtualization. We basically took our thousands of standalone servers running at less than 5%, and in a couple of years had them all down, virtualized to about 70-75%. So there's more to the story than that, but those are 3 major threads, Zoya, and I'm happy to talk to you more offline about that if you're interested. But I use this context to going back to the previous segment. We had hardcore grocery retailers as our executive team. And one of our key leaders, and I don't think he would mind if I said this, Jay Baitler was his name, he ran Staples Advantage. He called himself a troglodyte, and he was proud of it. Now, frankly, Jay wasn't. Jay was probably one of the more technically astute folks. But to make those types of investments, and if you add it up on the low end, 130 million, add it up on the high end, 160 million, when the company profit was 800 to 900 million, that's a big hit in the retail world. It's a big hit in any company. I mean, 100 million here, 100 million there, pretty soon you got real money. So the context was it had to be self-funded. It had to be through architecture, so you had multiple reasons to get there. And my final word on this, because frankly I could talk about it a long time, I'm actually very proud of what the team accomplished on this, was one of the challenges with every disaster recovery plan is people exercise the disaster recovery plan and rarely does it work. And certainly back then when it was taped to truck and offsite storage, you were dependent on people being able to get there. So can you imagine the bad combination of Superstorm Sandy and maybe the Asian bird flu that was at the time? Now it would be the pandemic that we saw the last year. So therefore, what you got to do is find a multiple purpose way to do that. And in our disaster recovery, we just took something that didn't work in 48 hours, which was our service level agreement when I started. It never worked. They practiced it every 6 months. It never worked. So we had to scrap that. And we called what we did push button roll swap. So once a month, we would literally in 22 minutes exercise our DR plan. And that I literally was laughed at by everybody, not only in the business team, but by the IT team. 2 years later, we have it, and it's been working for 10 years. And ultimately, it actually helped the data center move. Now, today, with cloud and virtualization, those things are, I'm going to say, routine. But in that 2006 to 2010 timeframe, these were leading edge. And so the answer to your question is you have to architect it. No single point of failure, multiple uses, and self-fund. Because you might get an incremental couple million if you have a CEO, CFO that get it. But chances are most IT leaders, CIO or VP of infrastructure, which was my role at that time, are saying, no, you got to cut costs. And if you want to do something great, but you got to find a way to fund it. And so I think that, and I don't think what I inherited was unique, other than it was at the wrong end of a hyper growth scenario that was starting to contract. So I just happened, right time, wrong time, right place, or right time, wrong time. I don't know, right place, wrong time. And I'm sure the other former CIOs or current CIOs, VP of IT, have had very, very similar stories, depending on the industry and the company they work for. This just happened to be at the curve when Staples was, trending down because the fast growth method, when we got to 2,500 stores, it didn't work anymore. So in any case, that's a real life story that I hope you find is helpful.
So Zoya, why don't you take a moment to comment, and then let's go back to Lindsey, see if he has any more insights that he wants to share from the panel discussions. We only have a few minutes left.
I just want to say thank you, Kevin, for this story. Now consider yourself invited as a guest lecturer to my course, because what you've just described is a classical business case worth studying. I know it's now DR is called business continuity management. Now you already have everything virtualized, but it is still a great story with enough drama to make it a perfect business case for future CIOs. So let's talk offline about that. Thank you.
I just want to make a few more points. One of the things that I want to circle back a little for a moment to George's panel, because George made a very interesting observation, and that is technology doesn't change your business, you do. So I think that's a good summary for that panel. Getting back to resilience, we talked about funding. One of the things that Yossi said is that funding really needs to come at the board level, because these are investments that you hope you'll never use. And the board's job is to worry about the long run. And in defining what resilience is, Yossi made an interesting comparison with insurance. So basically what he said was insurance offers only financial indemnification, but resilience helps avoid the loss of trust or reputation. Insurance only covers a few known named hazards, but resilience can also cover unknown, uncertain acts of God, including the darkest black swan. So I think that's it's giving a little more context to what resilience is. And he also mentioned that it's a competitive advantage, because the problem of supply chain disruption is that you don't have enough supply for existing demand. So resilience builds in agility, but it's not just about bad events, it's also about good events. And in his talk, he used a Starbucks analogy where they introduced sandwiches. And they had predicted a forecast. They had 1 sigma below, 1 sigma above. But at the end of the day, it was 5 times larger. And by having resilience in the organization, Starbucks was able to ramp up to that exceptional demand. So Allan, where are we? We got 2 minutes left. Does anybody have a compelling question?
A compelling question, or bring in one more story from what you heard from this week, something that you want to say about enterprise strategy. We've certainly heard many good points. One thing that I would add to what you said, Lindsey, is we talked about speed of development, speed of this, speed of that, but speed of decision making is critical.
Yes. So Vipin, that was a point that Vipin made, is that, and it was in the context of agility. And the idea here is that decision making, an organization can only move as fast as the leader, and decision making can be a major obstacle. So what he suggested is to I think what he said, that basically we need to I'm sorry, I'm drawing a little bit of a blank on that. All right. So, it's basically, we talked about decision making. What's the impediment to, getting a digital transformation or any other transformation going? And as I said, it's not the engineering, it's not the software development. It's generally the speed of decision making. So what's very important about agile behavior is that it starts at the top. That executives are able to make decisions quickly, and then it flows down to this agility. Also, is down to the rest of the organization.
All right, Lindsey. Well, with that, we are at the bottom of the hour, and I want to thank all of you for spending another hour of your time having our last open discussion of the season. We look forward to the last 2 panel discussions next week, as well as our town hall. please join us. But for now, have a great afternoon. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you for attending.